5 years. 5 years in internet time is like 30 years, I tell you. Tony, thank you very much. I am really honored to be here and a little bit overwhelmed with just the magnitude of this theater and stage. Wow, very, very impressive. Well, it is true. I do study the future of business. I also study by day technology. And I think back to the 120 years that you've celebrated as a business. And when you look at technology and you think about 120 years ago, it's pretty fascinating because you had sort of the first commercialization of cars. You had early experiments with powered flight. You had early equipment for motion video capture. And then you have, let's say, fast forward to today, the privatization of space travel. You have electric cars that are outperforming fossil fuels and alternative fuel cars. You have Instagram, Vine, and the world of selfies. We've come a long way. But I love the theme that you have here. I love the quotes throughout the building. I'm inspired partly by technology. I think I might be more inspired by the impact technology has on you and me as human beings and sort of what that means to the role we play day in and day out. Look, I'll just tell you, I've been at this since the early 90s, and I am still pushing what I feel as the same boulder up this never-ending hill. And for every sense of accomplishment, for every accurate prediction, for every company I was able to change, there are those that I haven't been able to. There are those who don't believe. There are those who would rather wander with what's known rather than to explore the unknown. And I think that's what we're here to do today. Accelerate, grow, and innovate. This is a time where, I mean, if you think about it, it's quite marvelous. Each one of us has an opportunity to make change or to impact change or to bring about change. And nothing says change and innovation like a PowerPoint presentation. I can't. I know you're just waiting for this to start going. But I think I really appreciate what Tony said because, you know, innovation is something that, believe it or not, is often sort of misconstrued. It's often looked at in terms of technology, markets, profitability. When in fact, what it really is, as Tony said, is this sort of confluence of disciplines who work together to change something, to do something better, to do something different, to do something more important than we did yesterday. It's as much to do with technology and efficiency and optimization as it is to do with just disruption, to change something because it was about time it was changed. You know, it's sort of this era of management versus leadership. One of the first quotes I bumped into outside was of Steve Jobs. You know, we celebrate Steve for just the amazing impact he had for us in terms of personal computing, making technology part of our everyday lifestyle, for making me pay way too much for a rectangle. But he's changed my life. And I want you to think about it this way. I'm not only a digital analyst, I'm also an aspiring, I wouldn't claim to be one, an aspiring digital anthropologist. How technology impacts you and me, how we go throughout life, the one thing that happens every day is that we start to change how we make decisions. We start to change how we influence others and how we are influenced by others. And that's what Steve did very well. He will always be remembered as a brilliant visionary, a pioneer in technology, but one of the things that he won't be as celebrated for is how he was a master architect of user experience design for life. I know that sounds really complicated, but think about it. He took a device that could play digital music and he made an entire ecosystem out of it that changed the music industry and how they make money. He did the same thing with motion pictures. He's doing the same thing with how technology and technology products talk to one another. We're just getting started. And that's what I want to talk about today. What do we do with all of the information that's before us? What do we do with these goals and objectives that we have before us? I'll tell you what, as your first symposium, I have to tell you that even being up here, I can't wait to see some of your other speakers. You guys have lined up some amazing thought leaders, and they're all here to do one thing. We are all here to do one thing for you, and that is to help you see things differently, to validate your thinking, to empower you to think differently than before. Over the years, I've studied what I've referred to as digital Darwinism. It's just a reality. It's this state that technology and society are going to evolve. It's constant, it's accelerating, and we have a choice. You guys have made the right choice, and that is to adapt. To understand that this is going to continue, and there are going to be some businesses that make it and some that don't. And I am older than I look, and I have unfortunately seen a lot of businesses that I grew up with, a lot of brands that I grew up with, just fall by the wayside because they failed to recognize how customers make decisions, or how they consume, or how they influence differently than the generations before them. This isn't anything new. It's just different. And what's fascinating about now is you have matures, you have boomers, you have Generation X, you have Generation Y, or AKA the millennial, all in the same workforce and all in the same marketplace, with Generation Z growing way too fast. And what that means is that how we succeeded in business yesterday is not how we are going to succeed in business tomorrow. I mean, just think about Kodak or RIM/BlackBerry, or look at the companies who are struggling to find a brand voice today. Look, one of the things that I grew up with over the last, 15 years or so, specifically looking at this, was I worked in a lot of business-to-business markets. And what was fascinating to me is that in every case where innovation played a role in transformation, it was often swept to the side to say, well, the only real innovation that's taking place is in the business-to-consumer markets. But I'm here to tell you that the greatest innovation that I have ever experienced and the greatest innovation that I see moving forward will happen in the business-to-business markets. And here's why. Because your customers do not see the innovation that's possible for their customers. And the companies that I've worked with successfully over the years have had to create pull and push for their customers and their customers' customers to help them adapt. Because if they can't help their customers succeed, then their customer base slowly declines. And that's what's happening right now. I've studied so many businesses that failed. And in hindsight, you can see that moment where it failed. And when you look and you forecast numbers and you look at performance of businesses who are not understanding how markets are changing, how people are making decisions about where to spend money and how, what ends up happening is that we are beyond the line of return. So, for example, you and I are the last generations to know what the Kodak moment really meant. It's really sad, actually, because my kids already look at the Instagram moment or the Snapchat moment. And now in business school, the Kodak moment will be that moment when you failed to recognize that your market was changing ahead of time. And they had ample warning. They had ample warning. But what ends up happening is when you get into a culture of management and not leadership, you are making decisions to compete for now. And that all makes sense when you are making money now. But what the future is about, what innovation is really about, is competing for tomorrow. Because when you start to compete for tomorrow, you're actually competing for relevance with stuff that doesn't even amass today yet. And by competing for tomorrow and competing for relevance, you start to make decisions differently. You start to invest in opportunities differently. And when you look in hindsight, so in this case, this is when Netflix overtook Blockbuster, it's always the same case. There's that moment in time where you can actually see failure play out. And I don't mean business failure. I just mean philosophy, innovation, investments in new opportunities, and a top-down leadership mantra that believes in you as employees to do things great. And that's what this symposium's all about. I wish I worked for businesses that would give me a voice back in the day. Instead, I had to go out and take the 20-year route to make my own voice. Now you have every model today looking at the same thing. Amazon versus Borders, iTunes versus the music industry, you name it. It's called creative destruction. It's a concept, I think, from the 1930s. A German economist basically said, the best thing that can happen to markets is if every now and then they blow up and you have access to new opportunities, new solutions, new products, new services. Every business, and I don't mean it to sound gloomy, but every business is going to be disrupted. Wouldn't it be great if all of this work in innovation meant that it was you, Merritts, that was the disruptor? And that's what this is about. It's about the next 120 years. And it all comes down to you and me and the work that we're going to do in shifting from management cultures to leadership cultures, to staying relevant tomorrow and today. One of the best quotes I had read didn't come from Charles Darwin, although this is often attributed to him. It's just this idea of resilience, building a culture where disciplines don't just report into disciplines. You have cross-functional teams working together to solve problems and create opportunities. For those who might have heard of or read Clay Christensen's book, The Innovator's Dilemma, I like to flip that title on its head. I actually think this is the dilemma's innovator. We have plenty of problems to solve, internally and externally. We also have problems that we haven't even identified yet. But when you have the sense of urgency, when you have something to solve, you don't have to just come up with ideas out of thin air, although you can, please. You can solve problems, too, to compete for the future. And trust me, there are plenty of problems that executives are trying to get their arms around. This is a study by IBM, and they'll say that, things like data being everywhere, data being big, whatever big means, social media and mobile, and then things like morale, things like risk. All of these things, they're not new. We're all dealing with this. But it takes vision, and vision doesn't just have to come from the top, right? Vision can come from each and every one of us. Sort of this opportunity for us to be something more than we were today or are today, to have a role in all of this that becomes more important. And when you look at the businesses that are performing or starting to outperform their competitors, they all share a real common theme. They want to better understand their customers. They want to better understand their employees. Not a bad thing. I don't know that I've ever met a CEO that said something like this. I think the key to being successful in business is to completely ignore our customers, to make it incredibly difficult for them to like us. And it's funny, because some of you smirk. I smirk, because I'm thinking as I'm saying this, all the companies that I hate doing business with. It's not an intention to suck. I believe that. I'm a hopeless optimist. But being a customer-centric company requires one thing, and it's one thing that I hope we all leave with today, and that's empathy. I'm sure you've seen a show out there, Undercover Boss. It's one of my favorite shows. It's one of my favorite shows, even though it has the same exact ending every episode. And there's a reason why we all love it, right? I mean, the ending is something like this: goosebumps, applause, tears, promises, and the words that always are stated. I promise we're going to change because I forgot what it was like to be an employee. I forgot what it was like to be a customer. And the nice thing is that your leadership already gets that. That's why we're here today. So what if you were in the shoes and you forgot what it was like? And you got so caught up in doing your job and following the processes that exist today, performing or outperforming what you're supposed to do, And it's that moment where you realize that the role you have today and the role that you can have tomorrow is yours to define. Because every company that starts to build a culture of innovation is looking at everything. And technology is just a part of it. A big part of it is, how are you and I going to improve how we talk? Something as simple as that. Do you know one of the greatest factors facing businesses in terms of innovation is low morale? Just caused because people can't talk to each other or because people don't have a voice. But that's changing, right? In order to be a customer-centric company, you have to, not, one, care, which you do, two, understand how all of this stuff is changing your customer, your customer's customer, and how they're all making decisions in your favor, and then start to improve response time, start to improve your resilience, start to improve how we communicate and collaborate. Everything becomes tangible. Everything becomes process-oriented. We actually can put together a checklist to get to where we need. Because numbers already show that in terms of profitability, which is something I think a lot of business leaders place great value on. Those that start to understand this start to greatly outperform their competitors. Because everybody has the same excuse. Too hard, too crazy, I don't believe this, I think we're all going back to a day of rotary phones one day. Whatever that is. And then some really amazing things start to happen. One of the research reports I'm writing right now shows this integration of marketing and IT to create a group that is more nimble in terms of their technology investments to improve collaboration inside and outside the organization. To process change and information so that way the business can make the right investments, not just in technology but in processes. To recognize that the I in CIO isn't just about information, it's about innovation. To recognize that marketing just isn't a department. Marketing is a way of business that stitches together the entire customer journey and your customer's customer journey so that you can control that journey into positive outcomes. Because whether we know it or not, whether we look at our kids and laugh at the way that they use cell phones today versus how we use cell phones. I don't even think some of our kids know that you can talk on these things. All of that has an effect on how your customers and your customers' customers are doing business. I can tell you that most of the time, I don't have the opportunity to talk about things so positively. I'm a champion and I'm a change agent just like you. I am sometimes a politician. I'm sometimes a lawyer. Sometimes a CFO having to make numbers work for people. And the one thing that's often thrown in my face is this supposed quote from Henry Ford that was, if I would have asked customers what they wanted, they would have told me a faster horse. And that quote is thrown at me because it's their way of saying, well, Henry Ford never asked his customers what they wanted. He just went out and innovated and created the automobile. And I get the same quote about Steve Jobs never asking his customers what they wanted. First, who in their right mind thinks that they're Steve Jobs and throws that quote out there like that? I mean, that's one thing. The second thing is that actually I had that said to me so often that I actually ran a bunch of research to see, did Henry Ford ever say that? And he didn't. There's no record that he actually said that. But he did say this, and this is from Dale Carnegie's book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which after all these decades is still a book that counts today because it comes down to human behavior. Because that's what all of this is about, is how you and I are changing because of our environments and our surroundings. And his point was to get perspective and to add it to your own, but to realize that how you got to where you are today isn't the only way to see the world. And in order to make decisions for a future generation of customers, we have to step outside of our comfort zone. And this is really important because a lot of us come from a world that was analog first, and we had to learn every digital revolution that came our way. And we adapted. But then you have folks who are digital and actually have to learn analog. And I can tell you that when you go backwards like that, it's not fun. So here we are making decisions for groups of customers that may not even see the world the way that we know it. And in some cases, we might actually be working against ourselves. So not only big data and not only research, but empathy helps us make better decisions. And every year when I study businesses and how they're looking at their new customers, I get the same response. Yes, in this case 80%, yes, we know who our new customers are. But when you look at that number below, which is only 30%, that's the number that signifies whether or not any of these businesses have actually studied new customers or asked new customers about their expectations. And that number actually turns out to be lower. And then when you overlap customer behaviors and expectations over where you're making investments today, you start to see that they're off, right? And over time, this missed spending starts to add up into missed opportunities. And over time, your competitors start to figure this out. Or over time, your customers just go elsewhere. And that doesn't have to happen. That's what innovation is about. It's about seeing the world differently and asking different questions than you did before. Because when you ask different questions, you get different answers. And when you get different answers, you're inspired in a whole new different way. Why? Because I refer to today's customers, or tomorrow's customers, whatever generation we want to look like, and this is a loving term, don't get me wrong, as accidental narcissists. They're absolutely consumed with everything that flies through their screen. This, which is often referred to as the second screen, by the way, make no mistake, this is the first screen. You will spend more time tapping on this screen and reading what's on the screen than you will on any of your other screens. And as you do, and this has nothing to do with age, by the way, it has everything to do with lifestyle. Once you do, you become more informed. A natural byproduct of being informed is you become more empowered. Once you become more empowered, you become more demanding. You want things now. You want things in real time. You want things personalized. You want information to come to you, and it does. It's probably one of the most powerful and efficient human information networks that has ever existed. You will know about world events because you're on Twitter on average 22 minutes ahead of when a major media outlet will report it. It's incredible. So what happens as a result? That means that if information, the way it flows, is changing, that means how your customers get information, or how they're looking for information, or how they're feeding into the information flow changes. I come from a time where I would go to an event and I would see this and I would say, put your phones down. I can't even. Why are you even here? The act is on stage. And then I realized that they're actually in that moment, and they love that moment so much that they're sharing it. And they're not just sharing it with one or two friends. They're sharing it with hundreds or thousands of people in that moment. So suddenly the 2,000 people that are in that room is now an event that's hitting 40, 50, 60,000 people. And it creates a moment, and it creates an experience. It starts to change how people connect to one another. So you have something, for example, like Facebook, where you're connected to your friends and your family. And then you have something like Twitter or Instagram, where you're connected to people who share interests. And then you have other networks like Pinterest, where you're following all kinds of cool things that your friends are curating around things that you want to buy or things that you want to invest in. And you start to realize that how you behave in each one of these networks isn't just different. It starts to become incredibly optimized for what you want to do. So leaving today, let's not look at it as what are we going to do about these millennials or these digital natives. Let's just start to look at it at a bigger, broader brushstroke as Generation C, a connected generation, because whether you're 55 or you're 18, those who are connected are going to behave differently than your traditional customers. And for the next 10 years, part of innovation has to take into account that you still have traditional customers, and you still have to do things as amazing as you do them today. And now we have to start to set the investments, to plant the seeds for how we're going to engage and win with a new connected generation. Because one is getting bigger and a little sillier. But the thing that strikes me as an aspiring anthropologist is that to them, this really is the best party ever. So much so that they have to share it Or maybe they're talking to each other. Or both. I've started to learn that the way that I see the world and the decisions that I'm making to help steer the world are irrelevant if I can't appreciate what's going on behind this screen. If I can't appreciate how to get on that screen. If I can't appreciate how to be the center of attention for what I call the ego system, where that screen literally is their life. And over the last decade, I've studied how the connected customer and your connected customer's customer, how it starts to change. And you look at the sales funnel, for example, and a lot of businesses are structured around this funnel. And this is where you start to get departments, and departments that are really good at optimizing that stage of the funnel. And you start to realize that the connected customer journey doesn't stop. And how someone's influenced and how someone is making decisions isn't necessarily just related to any one department. They only see one business. They're getting information, they're sharing information, and they become part of this virtuous cycle that creates in the center there an influence loop that exists in places that we are probably not even aware of today. Some of you are, right? Things like forums and review sites and blogs and authorities who don't publish in traditional media outlets. These are the people who become the trusted voices that start to inform every stage of decision making. And I have done this for robotic arm manufacturers, for assembly lines, all the way down to automotive brands and makeup brands. It is always the same journey. What changes are the channels and the networks, but what's constant are the stages and the fact that human beings start to influence the journey in ways that a funnel could never influence. So when you walk through what that journey looks like, you start to realize that there are investment opportunities for us. There's opportunities for innovation. What happens when you start your decision-making cycle and all you have is this next to you? And you need to learn more information about something. Some of you might go to Google, but I can assure you that the connected customer, the one really living the lifestyle, doesn't go to Google first. Not on the small screen anyway. Because what comes back? Websites. Websites that are optimized based on keyword investments so that they can show up on the first 1, 2, 3 pages depending on how far you think someone's going to go. And for any of you who have loaded a website on your mobile phone, you could probably feel the pain and the anxiety of trying to navigate a website on the screen. You're taking a screen where you pinch and zoom and swipe, a very different interactive set. And the only time you do that on a website on your small screen is when you're trying to blow something up so you could click a button to move to the next page. And after all these years of the web, I mean, just think about it. When's the last time you tried to look up a restaurant on the web, even with a laptop? I think it's the same person who's designing all restaurant websites. And I think they're doing this to keep them out of business because it's incredibly difficult to even see what they serve for dinner. And it's always a PDF. Why a PDF? I can't figure this out. And if you think about it, though, it's always the same philosophy. And this is where we can begin to start to innovate. It's just simple things like this. To recognize some of the biggest trends, for example, are responsive design or mobile first. And when you just think about it, it's not necessarily just that. It's not taking what we do or how we talk or the information that we have and trying to still make it a one-to-many approach. It's about rethinking the approach, the experience for someone who can continue their journey this way with the businesses who pave a new direction, pave a new road for them to go. That's the zero moment of truth, and that's what Google has called it. And Google says in that zero moment of truth, you're going to Google it, or you're going to YouTube it. YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world for a reason. It's not even a search engine. It's a place for great cat videos. More people are going to YouTube than they are Yahoo or Bing, because in that moment of truth, videos come back, and videos are optimized for this screen, and someone talks to you. You don't even have to read anything. And usually, it's someone sharing their experience, their expertise, their thought leadership. It's something to help you make a decision. So much so that Google had to let's just say update or change its algorithm recently. In the last few weeks, it introduced what it calls Hummingbird. And Hummingbird is based on how the connected customer is starting to search. They're not just using keywords, and they don't want websites. They're asking full-blown questions, and there's usually 8 to 10 questions for every market that your customers are asking. And in that moment, you have to realize what's coming back. If somebody pops that question into YouTube, what comes back? If someone pops that into a review site or a community or a board or a forum, what comes back? You start to realize it's not websites at all. It's content around shared experiences. This is an immediate opportunity for innovation. One company that I work with, it's a pharma company. One of their biggest challenges is that they realized their greatest need for innovation wasn't just to their market, but also for their employee prospects. They invited me to a strategy session where they said, we have got a major problem. We have thrived ourselves over the years, it was 100 years if I'm not mistaken, by attracting the greatest young talent to come in here. And they're seeing a huge lull. I said, so what is this lull? What is this problem that you're facing? It's so dramatic. Well, younger folks aren't applying as much as they used to because they're going to YouTube, and when they type in the company name, all that comes back are just horrible things about us. Or if you go to Glassdoor.com, all of the reviews about working here, well, they basically say don't. So I said, wow, that is a problem. What do you guys have on the table so far? Well, first what we're going to do is we're going to make a whole bunch of corporate videos about how amazing it is to work here. And we're going to flood YouTube. I said, that is brilliant. Of course, you're lying, but sure, that'll work for a couple weeks. I said, but let's take a step back. All right, so what are they saying that's bad? Well, they don't have a voice, their acceleration path isn't there, they don't feel recognized for their contributions, they have to deal with processes of a way that they don't work with, they don't like the intranet. I said, well, valid, okay. What about applying? What does applying even look like? Well, we have this job rec site that was built for the internet back in 1692, and first you have to put in a job rec number to bring up the page, and then once you get the page you have to click through about 17,000 links to get to the part where you have to download a form of which you have to re-upload. And I said, wow, that's crazy, because it's never going to happen here. And that actually takes an incredible amount of patience for a connected group that just can't actually read a paragraph in one sitting. So what are we going to do about that? And they realized that they actually had to innovate in terms of processes and how someone could be onboarded and the path that they would take. And that led to a whole bunch of reverse mentoring where younger people started to feed back and give back to management in order to start to change, bring both ends to the middle. And I'll tell you, one of the biggest roots of the problem was really human. Management called the younger generation the trophy generation. All they want is hugs. All they want are trophies. And it was just a failure to actually recognize that this generation worked differently, right? So instead of helping them become part of the process, there was an us and them situation created. And then once you could trace it to the roots, you could actually start to fix things. So innovation in that case became important, to recognize their expectations and their behaviors were just different than management was willing to accept. Because this group, once they get into the mind of making a decision, they have so many places for which to be influenced that in many cases we don't even know what they are. So we have to make investments in first identifying what they are and how to be part of it. And those next moments of truth as they continue the decision-making cycle are also steered by us. And one of the things that I often find when I talk to businesses is that each one of these steps are run not only by different groups, but none of those groups talk to one another. So essentially you find broken paths that are broken even not just to the screen, but just to what the next step looks like. Is it even seamless? And this influence loop, I can't tell you how important this is becoming. This is becoming so important that Google had to change its algorithm. Google had to start bringing in human beings into the mix, the content they produce, the videos that they create, the reviews that they write, because there is greater peer value in that than the copy that's on a website. Well, I jokingly refer to, what kind of copy is on a website? Is it copy that you wrote for your customer, or is it copy that you wrote for the person who was approving the job? And a lot of times it's the latter. And so that's why it's a challenge. To be customer-centric, we have to rethink everything. And that's great, because not only are your connected customers going to win, all your customers are going to win, because they actually think that you're being empathetic because you are. And that's purpose. That's caring. That's customer centricity. Because what ends up happening is that in a connected society, there's your brand promise, and then there is the experience that people have dealing with your business before, during, and after transactions. Those experiences are reflective of the relationship or the impression that they have. And what ends up happening is that you have brand promise and customer experience. Customer centricity is about bringing those two together. I can tell you that in 100% of cases that I've worked with businesses who go through transformation and who continue to go through transformation, not just digital transformation, but just relevance, resilience, to be important to a different type of customer. In every single one of those, they re-examine their vision and mission statements to see if it matters for a different type of customer, to see if it's even relevant for someone's customer's customer. Because if you can't actually help your customer get to their customer, who's going to do that? This is a funny example of what happens when you just completely close off, wear some blinders, and you walk through this decision journey, and you ask a question about, what do you think of this airline? In all of these streams. And these are the real experiences that came back. I've done this several times. This is for one particular airline I won't name. And unfortunately, I am on their loyalty program. All I did was feed this. This is not a sophisticated process. All I did was feed those responses into a word cloud generator that's free. And it takes the words that are most often said and makes them bigger. And so this is the brand. This is the customer experience of that particular airline. And in a world where I can go through a journey and make a decision based on the experiences of peers and experts in my world, I can assure you that this would not have been an airline I would have chosen. And this is true for every business. You can do this. I don't care how obscure the business is. You can do this. This exists. Connected society have been around, honestly, since the 80s. All of this stuff starts to get bigger and bigger and bigger every day. So as a joke, I went to the airline's website and I fed it into the same word cloud generator. I don't have that image here, but it was something like customer, service, loyalty, caring. You're like, wow. What world are you coming from? Because they're not at all close. And I sat on this airline, and one of the first videos that came up was how much they cared about customers. And no amount of content or intention in terms of videos or tweets or what have you is going to change the core of the business if the core of the business doesn't recognize that this is actually the experience people have. So I can tell you that if you do the same thing for JetBlue, Southwest, or Virgin America, you get the complete opposite word cloud. And all the process is intended to do, all this exercise is meant to convey, is that how could you not feel empathetic based on what people deal with? Or even more importantly, where the word cloud isn't even existing to what it should be, because people aren't talking or sharing the types of experiences you want them to help inform your customers and their customers along the way. It's because They need support. They need conditioning. They need reinforcement in these new areas to know that you're even there, to know that your customer matters, to know that their voice matters. Because if you can amplify their voice, if you can fuel it with positive reinforcement and conditioning in these public channels, it starts to influence everybody to TV-like impressions. And that's, again, another opportunity for innovation, because it really is about experiences. And it's really about improving something that may or may not be broken. It's celebrating that culture. It's recognizing that we're not actually as profitable as we could be. We're probably not making as much as we could be, because the more we start to understand these new markets, the more we increase our revenues, not shrink it. It's not about what we're doing today, it's about what we're not. You can only grow. And in order to grow, we have to recognize that new investments, new roles, how people connect with those roles and the information that powers them, it's all different. It's all new. It's all yours to define. The titles we had, the teams we're in, are not necessarily reflective of the titles you will have or who you're working with tomorrow. I think it's a great opportunity. Because your customers, anybody on the data team will tell you this, but your customers are intentionally leaving digital breadcrumbs all over the place because they want you to better know them. And look, I know some of you are thinking that sounds kind of weird, but let me tell you, I've studied this for many, many years. The way that you and I define privacy is not at all how the digital customer defines privacy. In fact, they see it as quid pro quo. If they get something out of it, they'll gladly share with you. And that's the point. We have to open our eyes to see things differently, not just gather data, not just gather insights, but translate those insights into things that are actionable, tangible, that I can do today and that I can invest in over the next 12, 24, and 36 months. And I'm not talking about putting this data in binders and adding to your shelf of dust collectors. I'm talking about things that are consumable, that we can use now. In the book that you're going to get tonight, I was inspired by Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. And for those who don't know what it is, Joseph Campbell sort of studied these mythological characters throughout history and found that a lot of them actually went through a same path, same obstacles, or in order to become sort of where they are in terms of mythological status, or mythical status. And I thought there was a lot of parallels with the hero's journey and your customer's journey, because your customer's journey is unique. And what's great is if you think about that experience divide, once you start to study all this data, all this insight, all this behavioral, social science, for example, you start to map out what that journey looks like. And then, for those who have business-to-business markets, you start to look at their customers' customers, and you start to realize that you can bring them together. And bringing those together is innovative for you and innovative for your customer and their customer. And you create a value chain that hasn't existed before. The other part of this is the real hero in this journey is you. You're the one that has to think differently about your job tomorrow than you did today. And that, I wish I had those kind of opportunities when I was coming up. That means this is all yours to define. And yes, you're going to be met with challenges. Yes, you're going to be met with uncertainties. Yes, there are going to be times where you want to bash your head against the wall. But then there will be time where there's high fives, beers, chest bumps. All that's happening every single day is that you're pushing forward. Because if you're not pushing forward, there are markets and competitors that are willing to push back. Alan Kay once said that the best way to predict the future was to invent it. And that's what we're doing. We're defining what may or may not exist. One such case study, and I put this together, by the way, last week, this deck, and within the last week, she's now left Burberry and joined Apple. But it's still a good example because this is probably why she got the job. Burberry was founded in 1856. One of the things that Burberry had to deal with in any market where you report to shareholders and stakeholders is you have to perform. And what the company was finding was that over the years, its products, its branding wasn't necessarily that attractive to the connected consumer. And there were glimpses where they were missing marks, where they might not be able to sustain themselves for the future. When you get that kind of scare, you start to change things. And Angela was inspired by looking at, let's just say in this case, digital natives, to see how she could make that brand more relevant. Not that you guys are in the fashion business per se like Burberry, but it's the steps that they took that I think are highly replicable. They looked at the journey. They looked at how they made decisions. They looked at what they thought was cool. They looked at the lifestyle. They looked at what they could align with in terms of values and products, all of which we do. We call it journey mapping. You do this for any kind of business, any kind of industry. And you start to see the things that you would need to change in order to be more relevant in these channels that you didn't even know existed, to see who these influencers or these authorities are, to see how this peer-to-peer network comes together. What you're looking at is a horrible drawing by Mark Benioff, who's the CEO of Salesforce. But that drawing means something. It was essentially taking that ecosystem and showing how technology and processes could come together to create what they called Burberry World. A connected, a cohesive, a consistent journey for that customer that was bound by technologies, processes, systems, in every moment of truth, in every channel possible, to create the type of brand that would be relevant. And then from there, they had to create products and price points that would also be relevant. All they did in the process by expanding their opportunity, by investing in new channels, all they did was grow revenue. Because that's all you can do if you're thinking about new market opportunities in a way that is important to you and them and you. And that's what this is about. It's just looking beyond what we know today to find what we don't. In every case where I study innovation, there are these 10 trends, these 10 pillars. You've got part of it going. You've gotten together to think about innovation and to work together in terms of innovation. That forms an innovation team. That forms teams internally to work together, to be rewarded against it, to change how you make decisions internally, to invest in different processes, to invest in people. I won't walk through all of these because I'll make sure you get this deck. But the thing that I found most important was this idea of fostering collaboration internally and externally, and accepting that not every investment is going to work. The best companies fail a lot. You just don't read about them. When they fail, they learn, and they go through the process again, and they improve and they iterate. And to do that, you have to have an infrastructure that supports that. Because if you don't, all you're doing is taking all this new stuff and putting it into the old stuff and expecting different results. That's not why we're here today. What we're here today is to change how we work together, bringing different people together to solve problems and to create opportunities. Lastly, I'm going to share this example because I want to open it up to a few questions before we wrap. This is a company out of India. Look, what it really takes, other than hard work, is to instill this into the culture. Companies like GE do this as well, where to be innovative has to become part of your job. Here, they take a certain amount of hours per week and they allow employees to just find ways to improve things, to share things, to invest in new skill sets. They invest in their HR processes where they have to come up with ideas. They invest in management processes where management has to take those ideas and have to do something with it. They create reward systems where X amount of those ideas have to be put into testing and put into practice. And they also invest in reward systems that show how well those have done and how many of those were performed. And those that don't meet standards, well, they haven't had that problem because everybody wants to step up to the plate. The point is that it changes the ethos of the company when it becomes part of your DNA. And that's what we're doing. This is the first of many innovation symposiums that you're going to do because in between them, you're going to make progress. Innovation is part of your DNA. Innovation is part of your culture. This is entitled How Computers Are Born. I share it with you for one specific reason. It's a dramatic visual that gets us to see that in order to think differently, we have to think differently. Products, services, philosophies, goals, metrics, reward systems, all of these things have to be different for a new time. And that's a good thing. Everybody in this room is here because you could make an impact. Everybody's in this room because your leadership team wants you to make an impact. It's understanding that the customer that you have and the customer that you will have for the time being are different, which is why we have to think digital. Things that are born digital, that are valuable, that are more relevant to a different type of customer and their customer. You have to lead the way, because if you're not leading the way, then your customers are going to find another way. And this is probably one of the best times to be in business, because a lot of people are making excuses right now. People don't believe that this is the best opportunity or that this is actually happening, but it is. And anyone who celebrates innovation the way that you do is bound to be successful. But what I want to say in the last 10 seconds before we go to questions and answers is that this is your time. This is a time where you can actually have an impact on your job and the jobs of those around you, on the customers and the markets, to improve everything. And what a wonderful time that is to be in business. Thank you. All right, thank you. All right, so we have Mike over there. Okay, and then Mike over here. All right, so with the 7 minutes and 55 seconds that we have, let's jump into a question or two. Oh, wow. All right. That was fast.
Hello.
Hello.
So you opened up your talk by saying innovation occurs at the intersection of concepts. So I'm curious, what is your response to those who say that when you have a new idea, oh, well, that's been done before?
Oh, yes. What of those?
One of those.
Well, I guess my response is, so remember earlier on I said that sometimes I'm a politician, sometimes I'm a lawyer. I have learned over the years that in order to present an idea, it has to be sort of packaged with evidence that shows that even though something has been done before, there are opportunities that were missed, or there are opportunities that can present themselves in order to make a business case for it. That's one of the ways. The other way is the artful understanding of sort of what are the hurdles that lie in the person that you're talking to. So a lot of this becomes sort of reverse psychology. Not that you have to get this complex when presenting ideas, but just in this regard, this is usually somebody's psychological response to not wanting to step outside of their comfort zone. And that is a natural way to respond to somebody who wants to push them outside of their comfort zone. So in that, it's really difficult because you already have someone who doesn't want to move. But when you can make the case, and the politician part comes when you can make the case in the hallways as well, then there's no choice, because now there's peer pressure to at least try that idea, but it also has to be presented with multiple ideas, knowing that some are going to, that you don't even want some of those to actually be considered, that you just want the one to go. So so questions like that are really hard to answer because there's a whole mess of things that you have to do in terms of theatrics to get somebody to really listen. But a lot of it comes down to that idea. Remember the example I shared with you how in the one pharmaceutical company, what we had ended up finding was that management didn't want to accept millennial behavior and work ethic. So instead they just pushed back against it. It's just this stuff, this is what we call politics, just exists. And there are ways to break through it, and that's one of them. Okay, we have a question here.
So I want to build on the same point about intersection of disciplines, because I think one of the things that you often encounter when you're bringing together two different disciplines is you've got an ingrained structure where you're trying to sell into. And so when you're trying to sell into that group, it requires that they do things differently on their end, or possibly even that they transform. How do you attack that? Do you have any examples where companies have successfully attacked that problem?
Yeah. So one of the slides is about this idea of an innovation task force or steering committee. So attacking it in that way, it's really difficult because people are ingrained in their processes. There's this sort of self-preservation thing that happens. Nobody wants to be the first to change because then not only are you outside your comfort zone, now you're unsure about your career, you're unsure about your longevity with the company, are you as valuable as you were yesterday? So without taking any of those into consideration, what ends up happening is that if you can create the need for sort of this innovation steering committee that starts to solve mini problems first, so you create a set of priorities like that are probably not unlike your business priorities. And you start to say, how would we solve these differently for a different type of customer? And you bring people from each discipline, right? You have been nominated because you're awesome and we need you on this task force. So you're going to work in the matrix for a little bit because we're going to solve these little problems. Now, get into a room and how are we going to work together to solve this first problem? And so those disciplines, I'm just tell you that I've spent the last 3 years with 5 different companies having to build these out. Yes?
That's part of the question, but the question I'm really after is not what the innovator has to do differently, but rather the customer. Because sometimes what you're selling to the customer requires that they behave differently, and that can be a challenge.
Yes. Okay, I like that one even better because I'm doing this right now, and it's for a financial services company. And they sell to businesses who have to sell to businesses who have to sell to customers. So I go to B to B to B to C. And it is incredibly complex because the further down the B's we get, the more, I'm lucky I have hair because I have been ripping it out. I have had to go all the way to the end and work backwards to show how customers are spending money differently and how their products are becoming increasingly irrelevant, and then have to do math that shows how 2, 3, 5, and 10 years over time this plays out. And in this case, I have been able to show, and this is crazy, that with every year that passes, one of those Bs goes out of business. And it's a matter of time that by the end of the 10, the top B has lost a lot of market share because all of these dominoes fell down. Now, this is not an easy answer, guys, but it is the only answer I've been able to come up with. It's an honest answer. I've had to scare the shit out of everybody going all the way up. And and I will tell you that for anybody in big data or research in this room, all of the answers are there. And if you want to find new ways to get a raise or a promotion, start talking about this today. You can do this stuff. It has worked every single time. It has worked every single time. Well, I've got 30 seconds left. Is there one more question? So this is probably going to mark me down a few points, but I live in Silicon Valley. And so one of the reasons why I am really inspired is because I feel like if I'm not inspired by technology, I feel like I can't even live there. I'll be bumped out as a resident. But I will tell you this, though, too. It is one of the most interesting places to live because you have folks who are innovators but are active parts of the community. So everybody that you know, every name that's been famous in Silicon Valley has to have an active role in government in the Bay Area because they hate politics and they're trying to reinvent and change the way that we vote, how we spend money, how we do things for citizens. And I'll tell you, there's Mayor Ed Lee in San Francisco. I'm part of his innovation team. They've got crazy cool stuff that they're trying to do, and watching them have to break through politicians and lobbyists and stuff is just, it's crazy, and you see what happened with the government shutdown. When I say everything is going to be disrupted, I mean everything. And so living there and being part of that is one of the reasons why I spend most of my time traveling the world. I think I'm going to go now. Is this on video? All right, well, with that, thank you so much for your time, everybody.